avoid making an open offer? There are very strict exceptions. Now, you have to bear in mind that exceptions of course have been there under the 97 code as well. By default, you trigger the code. Therefore, if you want to fall in any of the exceptional circumstances that I should not be making an open offer, then you have to read and interpret every word very, very strictly. You can't play around with those words. Simply because the rule is very simple. By default, every significant acquisition of shares will trigger a public announcement. If you want to fall in an exception that you should not be making an open offer, please look at the exceptions and exemptions very, very clearly, that you fall within the letter first and then also the spirit of that exemption, because if you don't, obviously more severe consequences of a penalty will ensue. So, looking at the exemptions, are these exemptions automatically available to a transaction? Again, the answer is no. You need to bear in mind that with every type of exemption, say for example, there is a transaction between two promoters, okay? Both the promoters have been already disclosed to the market that these are promoter shareholdings. Between the two promoters, there is a switching of shares. Some shares are being handed over to the other family or to my own group companies and so on. Now that does not by itself entitle you to seek an exemption, simply because the process also identifies that when you are doing a transaction where you want to seek an exemption, there are events which deal with pre-intimations. That means 4 days before I do the transaction, even between promoters, I need to make an announcement that yes, there is going to be a transaction between promoters. Obviously, it will not trigger the open offer, but because, again coming back to the same principle, if you want to seek an exemption, you must comply with the letter and spirit of all the activities that are attached to that exemption. So even if particular exemption requires you to do a pre-announcement, you must do that pre-announcement, otherwise you cannot get the benefit of that exemption. So you have to bear this part of the process in mind, that it is not so very easy to say that it's an inter-promoter transaction, we will report it once we do the transaction. That's not the answer, and unless you make that pre-intimation, SEBI will not allow you to take the benefit of that exemption. By default, you may have triggered the code, when obviously there will be more serious consequences for not doing it. You have seen the DLF order, all the promoters and the promoter group entities have been barred for 3 years from accessing the market. I will of course share this presentation, so all the timelines you can look at. We talked about escrow. Okay, there is another part of this takeover code which does not deal with the number of shares that you acquire. It deals with acquisition of control. What is the definition of control under the takeover code? It is the ability to appoint majority of the directors or to control policy decisions of a company. SEBI itself has been fighting tooth and nail to amplify this concept of control, to say that it is not enough that somebody has a positive control. Control can also be negative. And what does that mean? If I have affirmative votes in a shareholders agreement, that without my consent the company will not be permitted to do certain transactions, then according to SEBI, this constitutes control. It's somewhat weird that this issue did not get settled at the Supreme Court level. It was settled at the Securities Appellate Tribunal level, and the matter, if you want to really read that very interesting judgment, our friend Somsekhar argued, that is Shubham Ventures. In Shubham Ventures, the SEBI argued that there is a shareholders agreement which deals with affirmative votes, and therefore entering into a shareholders agreement or pursuant to shareholders agreement, you have acquired control over a company by signing the shareholders agreement. The argument on behalf of the shareholder was simple, that I can only block a decision, but I can never be the driver of this car. I have to be a passive. I will keep on watching, and I will direct what I don't like. I will say, no, you can't take this lane. I will put a no entry board on you. But I cannot tell you that you should take a right turn. So the argument was that control can be only positive, and a negative control is not a control for the purpose of any of the securities laws, whether it is takeover code or any other security law. That was broadly the argument. So SAT actually upheld this argument that control can be only positive and not negative. It went to Supreme Court, unfortunately withdrawn, and Supreme Court has actually mentioned in the order that please do not treat this as a precedent. So it is still wide open for anybody to argue whether positive control is control or negative control can also be control. There is still one matter pending before Supreme Court, that is Kamath Hotels, where SEBI is still wants to argue that aspect fully to arrive at a conclusion whether positive and negative control concepts are within part of the takeover code. I think given the timelines, we should move a little faster. One new concept that has come in as an obligation for a listed company. What is your obligation as a listed company? That your shares are under acquisition. As a board, there is a new obligation cast under Regulation 27, that is, the board must inform the shareholders whether the price that has been offered is that a fair price. So this obligation is cast on the targets board for the first time under the 2011 code. This did not exist earlier. There was no such obligation on the target board. In fact, apart from handing over the shareholders list or probably basic corporate information which was anyway in public domain, the board did not have such a significant role to play. They in fact had a negative role to play, that they could not have taken any major decisions. Say for example, sale of an undertaking, doing a preferential allotment of shares to somebody. So there were negative covenants being imposed on a target company. Now they have added a new component, that is, the board must look at the offer price, take independent counsel if they want, take independent valuation opinions if they want, and confirm to the shareholders. And this is a standard format which gets disclosed on the website, that whether the price that has been offered in the open offer is that fair to the small shareholders or the retail shareholders. So that is something which was not there in the earlier code. Let's move on to the more serious ethical science, and that is insider trading. So this is a famous statement by Warren Buffett, our god for securities market, that look for three things in a person: intelligence, energy, and integrity. If they don't have the last one, don't even bother about the first two. And that's all we are talking about when we talk about the insider trading. That are you a person who has more information than anyone else, and are you using that information to your personal selfish benefit? Are you dealing in securities? Sorry, we don't have time. Maybe I can circulate some notes who these famous nine are. We can probably identify one of them, that's Rajaratnam, and probably Martha, and of course the CEO of Enron. In fact, insider trading is also called Enronitis, which is wrong of trading in securities with the advantage of asymmetrical access to unpublished information. So who are insiders for the insider trading code? Anybody who has access to sensitive commercial information in the company is an insider. So if there are myths around who is an insider and who is an outsider, this is one of the funniest things that I found. If you go outside the company, does that make, will it not, will it take away from insider trading? The answer is no. Whatever information you have. Then I was talking about telephone conversations. These are the telephone conversations which were tapped. Incidentally, it was not in SEBI way back. If you recall the BPL Videocon cases, SEBI had used this kind of a corroborative evidence. And what was the corroboration being done? That a particular telephone line, and happily we were only in landline days in those times, that a particular landline was installed in the chairman and managing director's personal chamber. And nobody, as a routine, nobody else will have access to that room except the CMD himself. There were calls tracked from that number only to a particular broker, and those calls were then mapped across the securities transaction. That are these calls, can they be correlated to specific movement in the market or specific securities deals? So SEBI has been using indirect evidence, even without phone tapping, to say that can there be really any other judgment? Can there be any other conclusion that if I called you at 309 and 310, you entered into a transaction, and there is a pattern, there is a clear behavioral conduct that you see, and after every call there is a questionable transaction in the market. So SEBI has been using these kind of investigative techniques in the past. Now they have much stronger teeth and they can bite, and believe me, now they have powers for down raids. So if you believe that SEBI will not knock you at 6 o'clock in the morning, now they can and they will. SFIO, of course, is a much stronger body. They have much serious powers. So this is just an example of what happened in Goldman Sachs and how Rajat Gupta and Rajaratnam got caught. There is a rumor that Goldman might buy a bank, and see what Rajaratnam is saying. Gupta is saying. Yeah, there was a discussion in the board meeting whether, and he leaves it open. He doesn't conclude that. He doesn't utter that word. But he also does not respond no after the question. Buy a commercial bank? And the conversation ends there. All right. Anything else? Anything interesting? And then something interesting indeed happened after a few days. After the board meeting, Gupta learned that Warren Buffett and Hathaway had some investment agreement to be executed. As you can see the timing, there was an investment made which was sold within 24 hours, making a 800,000 profit in just 24 hours. So what really is insider trading? Why do we call it really bad? Because you are a listed company. Your shares, the only thing that any retail shareholder, anybody in the market has is what is in public domain. So what is in public domain? If you know something more, are you really able to keep your temptation to use that information and deal in securities? And dealing in securities is, of course, today interpreted to mean both. It is not just buying and selling. You could be even just buying or just selling, and still it will be hit by the insider trading code. So it is not that you actually must display a trading pattern to say that, but I am not trading, I just kept on buying. That's no good argument. Even if you are just buying or just selling, clearly that is a behavior which will hurt. So India and US, it's a crime. Apart from being a civil wrong, in some jurisdictions like Hong Kong, it is just a civil wrong and it will entail only a civil penalty of financial damages. One question which corporate law in India has still not answered that as a shareholder, as an investor, do I owe any fiduciary duty to others? As we know, the board of directors are trustees for the shareholders, for all the stakeholders, for customers. Now, of course, under the Companies Act, they are supposed to bother also about the environment and everybody else in the world except themselves. Do shareholders really have that same commitment in law? The clear answer to that is no. But there is clear movement, and you can see that in global literature, that controlling shareholders must have respect for the absentee shareholders, particularly in, say, a country like India, where large number of listed companies are controlled by one or more families to the extent of 60% plus of your paid capital, which means one single promoter is controlling a large chunk of the capital. We do not have many listed companies where the shareholding is as widespread as is seen in the US or UK or in most of the European listed companies, and therefore India is different. The global literature is moving towards the philosophy that controlling shareholders must, however, care. Even if you are a very selfish financial investor, do you not owe that duty of care to your fellow shareholders? So the legal answer in India is no. The legal answer to that in many jurisdictions is tending towards yes. It is still not clearly said, codified in yes or no. So what is the duty of care? That this is the one very good simple illustration of what is duty of care. You must take care to avoid acts of omission. You would reasonably foresee that it will injure anybody. When you say neighbor, it could be your fellow shareholder, it could be a co-director, it could be a vendor, it could be a customer, it could be anybody. So any action has, particularly in securities market, have you taken care enough to talk about injuring somebody or avoiding injury to somebody? If you can avoid that injury, then you are careful enough. Otherwise, you may have breached that duty of care. So there was a need, like Takeover Code, there was a need felt to even modernize the insider trading regulation as well. There are two regulations actually still even today in existence. One is the prevention of insider trading regulation. The other is relating to unfair practices in the market. So there are two parallel regulations working under the Indian securities market. Don't look at insider trading merely in isolation. Also look at what are malpractices which have been identified by the other set of regulations, which is unfair trading regulations. So insider trading is an act of trading based on information which nobody else has. But there are also patterns which are clearly seen as unfair market practices, and they are actionable also. One element which was absent as a written law in the previous insider trading, that suppose you are that full-time director or you are the promoter, you want to do a transaction, you want to invite investor. Is it a crime to tell to a proposed investor something more than what the people know at large? Is it a crime to disclose insider information, or is it a crime to use insider information? The current insider trading regulations are structured in such a way that only actual use of inside information to deal in securities is a crime. Strictly speaking, disclosure per se is not a crime, and that's a lopsided law. So one necessary change that had to happen in a very structured, documented way. Sodhi committee was appointed. Justice Sodhi was the chairperson of Securities Appellate Tribunal till very recently. A whole panel for revising this insider trading code was set up. New regulations were drafted after taking into account probably more than 18 months of deliberation and discussion with different players in the market, different intermediaries in the market, different issuers and companies who wanted to respond to these new regulations. And after a whole lot of deliberation, the committee came up with new draft regulations. They were open for public deliberation till end of the year last year, that is 2013. They have now been, they will be implemented very soon, anytime, once the SEBI board accepts and formally announces the new insider trading regulations. So what you look at today may change very soon, and now that we have lived through almost 10 months of this year, it's virtually any time now that SEBI will actually announce the new the new insider trading code. Many significant changes have happened. First, definition of insider itself. A classic example, a public servant who is in charge of modifying a policy. I am the secretary in charge of defining a new industrial policy relating to a particular sector. I know exactly when I will sign the notification. Am I an insider for that entire listed industry? The new regulation will actually say yes, you are an insider, because you will make the change of policy and you are likely to benefit because you have not only insider information on the company, but you have insider information on the future change of law. And therefore, you must be prevented from using that information, which is unfair to the rest of the market, because they just don't know how the policies will change. There may be just an indication in the market, but definitively you are that single individual who will implement that change. And therefore, if I start trading upon securities in that industry based on that knowledge, I will be penalized for insider trading. Unpublished price sensitive information. This report is a very interesting report. It is split over two parts. One is a whole discussion on the new concepts, that what is unpublished price sensitive information. And they have given some very interesting but sometimes not very convincing examples. That CEO has suffered a heart attack. Is this unpublished price sensitive information, and how do you come to know of this? So if this happens within the boardroom, obviously the directors are the only ones who probably will become insider for this unpublished price sensitive information. But if he collapses in a public clinic and somebody sees that, is he not the famous CEO of the largest companies? Then it is not unpublished price sensitive, because I have seen it with my own eyes, and this was not supposed to be kept a secret. And therefore, as a member of public, if I watch somebody fall down in a clinic, that's not supposed to be a unpublished price sensitive information. So you may not necessarily agree with all the illustrations that the committee has given in the report, but it's very interesting to see how they want to amplify the concept of what is unpublished and what is published, and whether it can be used or it may not be used. Another concept that has undergone a significant overall is the due diligence. Now let me ponder on this due diligence aspect a little bit. Under the takeover code, under the old takeover code, there was no provision for due diligence. So, although it is entirely staged managed, obviously every new investor will do due diligence, and we are just shying away from that fact of life. So, when the insider trading regulations were being redrafted, this aspect had to be dealt with. Now, very weirdly, if you look at Nirma judgment in Supreme Court, Nirma was a classic case. This was the acquisition of convertible securities, which were actually taken as a pledge. The pledge was triggered because the basic loan transaction failed, and after the loan transaction failed, The lender had no option but to trigger the conversion option and acquire shares in the listed company. With no knowledge of what the promoter was actually doing, large liabilities were created through fraudulent transactions before this conversion happened. Obviously, the acquirer went to SEBI and said, please, you are the regulator for this market. I have been defrauded. I have triggered a conversion of a convertible instrument, but knowing fully well that I will do this, large liabilities have been created and large fraud has been played inside the company, which I had no mechanism to find out. I could not have done a due diligence. You prevent by law any due diligence being created because I will start trading on insider information. So if I don't get access to any insider information, how will I ever come to know unless the auditors point out that there are fraudulent transactions in the company? I do not really understand why this was not convincing enough. Of course, there will be much deeper facts which we have no time to go into. The long and short of it is SEBI denied taking into account this aspect and said you have to go ahead with the open offer. Open offer was clearly made based on this conversion, but after the conversion, after the public offer, they went back to SEBI and said that now we have discovered, because of auditor's report, that there are significant frauds. Can we not withdraw the public announcement? Can we not withdraw from the open offer? SEBI said no. They refused to exercise their discretionary power what they have under the insider trading code. Matter went right up to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court said, sorry, we do not see, we cannot substitute ourselves in shoes of SEBI to say why discretion should be exercised in favor or against. We will not substitute the judgment, but they came up with a very interesting argument. But you are an investor, you are an enlightened investor, you are a very person of commercial prudence. You should have done a due diligence before you triggered the conversion. Now this is completely antithetic to the basic code. That by law I am prevented from doing a due diligence, and here is a Supreme Court ruling which said, but you should have bothered to do a due diligence first. So while this paragraph of the Supreme Court has come under a lot of stress and debate and discussion, the consequence of that is when the new insider trading regulation was being drafted, this issue actually came up, and they have taken a very interesting position. The new regulation will say that if the acquirer wants to do a due diligence, a proposal should be made to the target company's board. The board will take a decision whether it is in the interest of the company to allow such a due diligence to be conducted. If I were sitting on the board, first of all, I would be the first one to get the boot. If the acquisition went through, the board will be the first lot to get out of that position. So I have to convince myself that this acquisition of shares, which will lead to a public announcement, this due diligence must be offered. It is in the interest of the company. Now, if the board was so convinced that you need a new investor in the company, they would have themselves said that we must do a preferential allotment of shares. You don't need an acquirer to tell you that I want to do a due diligence. So what will happen with this concept of conducting due diligence on listed companies with permission of the target? But when will that permission come? If the board comes to a conclusion that offering such a due diligence is in the interest. Now believe me, most of the boards do not know what is underlying. They believe on a blank certificate being issued by a CEO, then obviously downwards all the way to the line manager, who would not be careful enough to do really a very thorough due diligence check before their reporting goes all the way to the quarterly meeting. Given that fact, no board, I'm not too sure how the board will really look at this possibility of a due diligence. Then there is another very novel principle that they imported from the US code. Remember, there are individuals who will perpetually have higher knowledge than anybody else. And who are they? The promoters themselves.